Hello, everyone. This is Gary from Timeline Astrology. So, this is my update on my prediction about the stock market crash in 2023, which of course didn't transpire, at least not in the US. I don't know about the situation in China. Maybe while I was looking at the US and being America-centric, maybe something was going on there. I think reports are coming out of China that indeed they're in trouble there in the stock market. But I do want to hold my hand up and say that I got that prediction wrong because I was focusing on America and the stock market there. But I also want to look at the nuance of this and how there are many things that you get right, even if the main prediction is wrong. And I don't see a lot of other astrologers doing that. I don't know. I don't see them anyway. Maybe they are, but I think a lot of astrologers just make a lot of predictions and they don't look at whether they're actually correct or not. Looking back, I'm always doing that. I'm always looking at where did I get something wrong. This, I think, is the only major prediction I got wrong so far, but I could be wrong about that. I don't know. Um, but there's a lot to say here. And one of the things before we jump into the astrology and then also maybe looking forward and seeing how this might pan out in the future is actually some things I think we all are guilty of as astrologers looking at anything. And that is our biases. So when I looked at the 1929, and I'll show you the 1929 crash, this was 24th of October, 1929. The reason why I'd even entertain the possibility of a crash in 2023 is because of the astrology of 1929, because it was so similar. Rahu and Jupiter had come together in Aries. That creates a kind of bubble in this day and age. That is the AI bubble. That's literally artificial intelligence. Rahu, artificial, Jupiter, intelligence, Rahu, Jupiter in Aries, artificial intelligence. Massive spike in that, in all of the what is called, I guess, the Magnificent Seven stocks. So all of these tech companies are really driving the markets up and it's really rallying. That's one of the reasons when I saw that in 1929 and I saw that kind of high and then crash. I mean, crash implies, of course, that there's a high before. I mean, that's quite obvious. And I'm not taking that off the table, by the way, in terms of the astrology when we see what's happening in 2024. There's definitely a lot of volatility, but I do also want to be mindful of a potential bias there also, because if I initially had the bias of looking at something that I initially thought, which is the initial bias, by the way, when you get the first news of something and you go with that, that's a bias. Then you look for that same thing and you have a bias there where you're looking at confirmation bias. That's a more obvious bias. But then there are other biases where it's like, oh, I believe this or I said this, so I'm going to just dig my heels in whether I actually fully investigated this or not. I'm trying to be really mindful of not making these mistakes. For example, if now I look at my prediction in 2023 as being wrong and just seeing it as wrong, which it quite clearly is in one way, but then take everything I said as wrong, because I obviously said quite a few things in that prediction, if you watch the whole video, that are right. And I have to be really mindful of reacting to that and then saying something that's opposite just because I got that one wrong. Right. So because I got that one wrong, that it wasn't a crash in 2023, then, oh, I'll say what's opposite. Then there's no crash. Or I'll say, actually, no, it didn't happen in 2023. It was going to happen in 24. So I have to be really mindful to approach everything I'm looking at with a fresh pair of eyes. However, obviously, it's not possible to remove all the astrology from the context. So if you remove yourself from the context completely, you can also go wrong because you don't know what you're actually talking about. You're just speaking of the astrology and giving vague interpretations of the astrology that you hope will, be pinned down by people who are listening. That's fine. That's good astrology in a way. But then the flip side of that and the pitfall of actually taking it too much in context is that you're then bringing it into context and then getting swamped in all of the minutia of he said, she said in the context of the markets or whatever. And even in markets, people are so divergent in terms of massive differences in opinions. Like it's not just a little bit. It's like, oh, the markets are going to crash in 2024. Oh no, the markets are going to rally like never before in 2024. You've got widely different opinions, right? And who's right? They can't both be right, surely. But maybe there are. That's the thing. In 2024, maybe it's real high and lows that we're going to experience. Maybe so, because it looks to be very volatile in 2024. This is again going back to 1929. The one thing I want to say that didn't happen, and there was quite a few things obviously different about 1929. Obviously, I was talking about the Venus in debilitation at the time, and then joining Ketu in South Node in Libra. In this instance, it was also Ketu in Libra, but finished up in Libra into Virgo, meeting with Venus. But if you see here, this is where I'd come to think that, okay, there's something happening here by October, November. It's almost like it was on a knife edge because by the time that Venus had finished with Virgo, Ketu, the true node Ketu, had moved in, only just. So it really hadn't kind of met fully with Venus in a way. And then the Sun, which in 1929 was in debilitation, almost exactly debilitated here, with Mars and Ketu conjoined by exact degree. This was the stock market crash. And that happened again by the end of 2023 in October, but it happened on October 5th. Now, what happened on October 5th, this is another thing to say about astrology, is that when you're looking at something as a potential, that's another bias, you're looking at only this potential, you're missing all the other potentials. And of course, the Mars-Ketu conjunction in October meant war in Israel. Now, the question is, does that mean that if that happens, that that's expressing that astrology in that way, and then it doesn't express itself in these other ways that it could have otherwise? It's like it just needs an outlet, and that's the outlet. Maybe that's a good argument. But here you can see by the end of November, as Ketu moves into Virgo, the Sun and Mars have moved out of Libra. Venus is about to move into Libra. So it's almost like it just escaped it all in a way in the markets. But the one thing I want to say, and I did get right in the video, was that Saturn in Aquarius kind of held it all together, I believe. So there's this concept in Indian astrology of drishti, of sight. And Saturn is said to have sight on the third house from itself, drishti, and it desires that. It's different to aspects in a way than Western astrology, which take in all of the aspects, squares and sextiles and everything else of all the planets. But in Vedic astrology, they're specifically talking about drishti, of sight, of desire of the planet. Saturn has sight, 100% sight on the third house from it, it's sextile. So on Aries, on this configuration of Jupiter, Rahu, and this bubble in the markets. And you might say that's another signature of how it was kept together. Maybe through the fear of it going, another way, like going south, or just the limitation or holding it all together, right? That's Saturn in Aquarius aspecting Aries. But what's happening now is that Rahu, the North Node, has moved out of Aries from the end of November, and it's currently in Pisces. And now Saturn is aspecting Jupiter on its own. It's like taking the stimulus, taking the stimulant of Rahu away, like the fake high, and then placing Saturn restraint on it. So this kind of suggests, in terms of leaving aside the stock market for now, this suggests economic challenges. This suggests a recession even. At the very least, it's sort of something having to come back down to earth in a way. Now, that could be good in terms of the inflation situation, because that's the other side of Rahu and Jupiter. There's the stock market high, but then there's also this high inflation. So again, we need to be mindful of what we're talking about. And I guess maybe I'm not qualified enough to talk about all of these issues, stock market especially, because it's so confusing. But there is a difference between the stock market and the wider economy. And the wider economy has been challenged in recent months. That's obvious, right? It's just, in this case, we're just going to talk about the stock market. So we'll just focus on that. So in terms of the stocks, like it does suggest that there's a bit more sober kind of approach here for the next few months. But what happens subsequently is what's important. So let me look at the next few months for you. So by May, so this is what happens. This is important. By May, Jupiter moves into Taurus. And by June 1st, Uranus moves into Taurus. Now, remember, I'm using sidereal zodiac here, not the tropical. So this is something you have to be mindful of if you're listening to my channel, that this is sidereal. This is more in alignment with the stars, not the seasons. So Jupiter moves into Taurus on May 1st in a square to Saturn, and they move into a more exact square later on in the summer. And again, by June 1st, Uranus moves in. This is a whole other ballgame. This is like, okay, remember that Saturn and Jupiter came together on the 21st of December 2020. So that's the conjunction of Jupiter Saturn. And they conjoin every 20 years. But then they move into a square to each other, an opening square, you might say, with Jupiter moving ahead of Saturn, which is a faster moving planet. So this is kind of like the test in a way. And even though Saturn in Vedic astrology isn't aspecting or looking or having a drishti on the fourth house from it. There is no, Saturn doesn't look at the fourth house from it in a sense. There is an aspect, a square aspect, a tense kind of corner in a way. It's like turning a corner, like a conflict that goes on here with a square. But Saturn isn't as strongly aspecting Jupiter, so it's not going to impede Jupiter as much. Rahu is no longer aspecting. Rahu is said to aspect the 12th house from it, the house that it's just been through the sign Aries. So it continues to aspect Aries, but Jupiter is out of that. So Jupiter would seem to be coming into Taurus into a better situation. Now, again, I have to be mindful and aware that I could have a bias here. I could wish to want to give you comforting news, right? And not look at this in another way because there are other things obviously you can see here that might be challenging. So we need to keep a level head about this for sure. But Jupiter and Taurus no longer under the thumb of Saturn or overshadowed by this fake situation with Rahu and the markets. Yes, there might be an initial kind of slump in 2024, but then it could be that there's this better situation coming through. Now, all of that would be great, except for one thing, and that is Aquarius. Or sorry, not Aquarius. Slip of the tongue there. Uranus. It's kind of like the same thing, isn't it? Aquarius, Uranus. But that's why, in modern astrology, people say that Uranus rules Aquarius. In fact, in traditional Indian astrology, Rahu rules Aquarius. Either way, Rahu, Aquarius, Uranus, Aquarius, it's all this kind of upheaval and shock to the system that these planets and this sign brings. So even Saturn in Aquarius, by holding things together, it's still in Aquarius innovating. It's still pushing the envelope. It's still bringing in this new AI system that we're all having to kind of incorporate into our life and in jobs and all of that. And while that's happening, it's in direct conflict in a square, remember. It's not aspecting or having drishti, but it is squaring the Taurus planets, including Jupiter and Uranus. And that's a conflict all of its own. Like again, back to 2022 or 2020, Saturn in Capricorn, Uranus in Aries, that was a conflict between individual freedoms and the needs of the many, Aries, Capricorn. Now it's a conflict between wanting stability in our assets, in our bank balance, and tech innovation, Taurus, Aquarius. And it's highly conflicted because Jupiter, it's not just Jupiter, it's Jupiter and Uranus for the next many years. And at least in a square to Saturn for the next year until March 2025. So there's this conflict between the tech innovations, the new AI innovations, and how it's impacting our bank balances, literally. So whatever about the stock market now, put that aside. We're talking about our own assets. And why this is a challenge is that even though Jupiter's there, Uranus is showing change and disturbance. And it's kind of like you would like to think that, okay, I have a certain amount in my bank balance this year and I'm going to save, and then I'm going to have this amount in my bank balance next year. But with Uranus, you can't really predict any of that because if currencies are changing, if even currencies are changing, or the value of the currency is changing. You can't make those predictions. And that's what's more volatile about this situation and conflicted in a way. And this could also drive the sort of protest of Saturn in Aquarius. But also on the other side of that, the humanitarian push, the need for social welfare. This has been borne out through history. Saturn in Aquarius has brought civil rights movements, social welfare movements, humanistic movements. Like this is Saturn in Aquarius. And it's this push for this because of things not being very predictable or being very volatile in terms of our money, literally our currency, whether it's dealing with our currency in a different way because of inflation and deflation or whatever. I don't know about all of that, but or whether it's digital currencies and or even central bank digital currencies, whatever it is, this Jupiter and Uranus and Taurus square Saturn in Aquarius is showing the conflict in 2024. Now, when we add one last thing, and I'll just finish up on this point, in September, what happens is Venus joins Ketu, the south node in Virgo. Now there's no debating and denying that Ketu is well ensconced in Virgo. Ketu, the south node, which removes things in Virgo, can join Venus in its sign of fall, its debilitation, by September. That's one other thing to keep an eye on here because this is kind of a part of what I thought would be a bit of a problem in 2023. And again, it was, remember, it was in certain parts of the world. But if you want to think about it in terms of the economy or the stock market, this could be a challenge. Now, the upside of this is that Jupiter is in Venus's sign Taurus and is aspecting Venus with a trine. So this is more positive. And without wishing to be all sort of, Pollyanna-ish about it, that this is just wonderful and that this is amazing. There are challenges here, but there are some upsides to this as well. And even the fact that Jupiter aspecting Venus, but also aspecting Pluto, which is the other part of this, the bigger part, is that Pluto and Jupiter in 2024 are now coming into a trine, a more helpful expression. Whereas previously they were in a square, now it's a trine. So as Pluto continues to change the systems, while new systems come online with Pluto in Capricorn, Saturn in Aquarius, and eventually how these all kind of bring a new world order, essentially, with all the planets, then Saturn, Rahu, Neptune all meeting in Pisces by 2025. This new world order obviously is going to shake things up in a bigger way from 2025. But for now, Pluto continues to dismantle the current system and is in a friendlier situation with Jupiter and Taurus, which could suggest that, yeah, changes happen more easily in a way and all of that. But it could also mean that there's more stability brought in to kind of help with the collapsing systems. As conflicted as it might be in some ways, I think there's some benefit to this in many other ways. And again, I'm trying not to sugarcoat it, but give you a perspective that there's a very mixed bag, essentially, in 2024. There's some highs and lows here. So anyway, with all of that said, I just wanted to, put it out there that, we astrologers, at least from my perspective, do think about what we've said. And we learn a lot from mistakes. We learn a lot from our predictions and interpretations. And that's how we even make predictions or interpretations in the first place. We interpret things because of what has happened in the past, and we see how it pans out in the future and how it is playing out right now. And that's how we all, as a community of astrologers, write certain things, and that all gets correlated now. And in fact, the fact that all of that now is being amassed by AI is another thing, that every astrologer, no matter who you are, is putting out this into the universe, into the internet, and that's itself being gathered by AI and being used. So everybody's voice should be heard in that sense. And so that AI can gather this and give you a kind of uh, some very sort of, not, maybe it's not completely unbiased, of course, because everyone has their individual biases, but it can be at least less biased than the individual astrologer's point of view. So instead of getting focused on my point of view, your point of view, we can, in a way, with the new tech, with AI, allow it to help us see things more objectively. And that's why AI is doing a better job than even doctors right now in diagnosing disease. So maybe in the future, AI will do a better job than astrologers at predicting the future. So that's my hope for AI in the future. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any questions, please feel free to post below. If you have any comments, I would love to hear your comments about all of that. And we shall see. Okay, until next time.